Daily news and analysis. We keep you informed and inspired.
This is World Today.
Hello and welcome to the panel discussion of World Today. I'm Ding Heng in Beijing. An annual joint military exercise between the U.S. and South Korea have been cut in half at Washington's request. Before the Ulchi Freedom Shield exercise began on August 17th, U.S. President Donald Trump called for its reduction, citing his good relationship with North Korean leader Kim Jong Un, as well as Seoul's lack of assistance with the Iran war. South Korea has been a U.S. ally for more than 7 decades. The two nations have a mutual defense treaty. Now, is the alliance getting increasingly transactional and unstable? Is Washington's latest decision dealing a severe blow to American alliance credibility? These questions and much more in this edition of the program. To listen to this episode again or to catch up on previous episodes, you can download our podcast by searching World Today. So joining us now on the line are Peter Kuznick, Professor of History with American University, Keechang Kim, Professor of Law with Korea University, and Professor Chen Yun from Fudan University, who is also a visiting professor at the Graduate School of International Studies, Seoul National University. So, thank you very much for joining us, Professor Kuznick, Professor Kim, and Professor Chen. Professor Kuznick, to start with you, to South Korea, how much does the shrinking of this annual Ulchi Freedom Shield military drills matter?
Well, it matters significantly to South Korea. It might be a godsend for South Korea, given that the Lee government has wanted to improve relations with North Korea. This might give the opening that they've been looking for to ease the tensions and begin the negotiations. However, North Korea's initial response has not been very welcoming. Kim Jong Un's sister has been very dismissive of this gesture on Trump's part, and as viewing it more as a sign of weakness for South Korea than a door opening for improved relations and negotiations. So a lot of it's going to depend on whether or not the North Koreans seize this opportunity, take advantage of it, and use it to improve relations with both the United States and with South Korea. Right now, we're not sure how North Korea is going to respond. But I see this as a sign on the part of Trump of his extreme weakness at this point, his terrible situation in Iran, his punishing South Korea for not coming to U.S. aid in Iran, which is a ridiculous request by the United States. So this is a very bizarre gesture on Trump's part. There was no consultation with South Korea. In fact, South Korea learned about this by Trump's posting on his Truth Social network. So this is a bizarre incident, potentially positive, but also possibly disastrous.
Professor Kim, going to you. In December last year, U.S. Secretary of Defense Peter Kuznick declared South Korea a model ally worthy of a special favor from Washington. And as recently as August 14th, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio called South Korea an quote-unquote indispensable partner, saying that the two sides had entered a historic new era of cooperation following President Donald Trump's visit to Seoul last year. But now there is an apparent re-evaluation of this relationship on the part of either the Trump administration or President Trump himself. What do you think this tells us?
I suppose this tells that the United States is no longer a reliable ally for South Korea. Unfortunately, in recent times, the Trump administration has been their foreign policy, not to mention what happens in Iran, but foreign policy concerning Korean Peninsula has been lacking any consistent principle. US and Korea has long been talking and repeatedly asserting that they are close allies, but all of a sudden, United States basically breached the Korea-US FTA, and Trump administration suddenly imposed or threatens with quite extraordinary tariff barrier. And then this Ulchi Freedom, whatever it's called, that joint military drill, scaling back, that is also totally unilaterally determined by the United States side. All these kind of steps, they kind of lack any principle, and they basically show complete disrespect for South Korea. I don't think US is even treating South Korea as a diplomatic partner or counterpart. It feels that as if US is some kind of thug demanding protection money, and then just do this and do that, giving up some excuses, not even excuses, just determining whatever US sees fit. This is a significant sign that the relationship between US and South Korea is drifting gradually farther and farther apart.
I definitely take your point. So now turning to you, Professor Chen Yun. President Donald Trump has repeatedly expressed interest in engaging again with Kim Jong Un since their last encounter back in 2019. That was during the first term of President Trump. He has personally confirmed that he is planning to meet with the North Korean leader this year. So, by cutting short this annual military exercise, joint exercise with Seoul, how much goodwill do you think Washington is actually conveying to Pyongyang?
Yeah, Trump he announced two reasons for shortening the U.S. South Korea military exercise. One, he said cost and economic consideration that U.S. South Korea military exercise are extremely costly, and a large part of the expenses are borne by the U.S. and this fully conforms to his America First and his economic pragmatism, diplomatic logic. And the second reason he said he wants to show goodwill towards North Korea. He attempted to prompt diplomatic dialogue on the peninsula by showing unilateral goodwill. But analysts point out that Trump's goodwill is not generally aimed at convincing North Korea, but rather has a strong instrumental nature. One reason is, of course, it is a political show for the upcoming midterm election in the United States. Trump is extremely eager to gain some political capital in diplomacy, such as announcing he successfully prevented the outbreak of a nuclear crisis on the peninsula. In order to prove to the voters his effectiveness of his strongman diplomacy. At the same time, another reason is he expected a two-pronged effect. That is to both criticize South Korea and test North Korea's response at the same time. So Trump directly pressured the Jae-in government of South Korea through reducing military exercise. He complained that South Korea did not cooperate with U.S. strategic actions in Iran. At the same time, he also reminded Kim Jong Un that only Trump himself can bypass the establishment and directly provide North Korea with security space, attempting to test whether North Korea is willing to divert from the North Korea Russia military alliance.
Okay. So, Professor Peter Kuznick, going back to you, following this point by Professor Chen Yun, arguably Trump is staging a political show to prepare for the upcoming midterm election. Following that point, I mean, for President Trump, his administration is now fighting an unpopular war with Iran, and he is yet to fulfill his electoral pledge to put an end to the war in Ukraine. So, how useful is a possible summit with North Korea's leader to Trump and his fellow Republicans if that event happens?
Trump is not dealing from a strong position right now. Barely 30% of Americans approve of his presidency in the second term. A much lower percentage approve of his foreign policy. Usually, when the United States goes to war, 60, 70, 80, 90% of the people will support the president and the war in the beginning. Then it will gradually lose popularity. This one had no support from the very, very beginning, the U.S.-Israeli war against Iran. So, and Trump has been trying to get out of that, but has been completely unable to do so. The memorandum of understanding that he signed got attacked by the Republicans as being worse than the deal that Obama signed. So Trump withdrew from that effectively. So we're in a strange moment right now in that Trump wants to do anything he can to distract from the Iran war. Now, if he does have the summit with Kim that he says he wants, but there's no real indication that that actually happened, Kim Yo-jong has said that they didn't talk, or she doesn't know anything about them talking, and there's apparently no agreement for any kind of meeting between Trump and Kim. But if Trump does have the meeting with Kim and he doesn't come away with some major deliverables, then he's going to look even worse because the reaction in the United States has not been positive to Trump's initiative. It's been a knee-jerk reaction saying that Trump and wants to be friends with Kim Jong Un. But the situation for Trump is even worse in a sense that when he had his meetings with Kim Jong Un back in 2019, North Korea was in a much weaker position than it is today. It very much needed economic relief and other support from the United States. Now it has strengthened its relationship with Russia. Russia has been investing heavily in North Korea at this point. So North Korea is not in the position that it was of kind of a desperate need for an agreement with the United States. And in fact, so North Korea has a relationship with China, which is for the most part positive. It has a relationship with Russia that is extremely positive right now. And so the United States, Trump might want this, Trump might need this. He might think it's going to bolster his position, but the odds are that will only make him look weaker because this is seen in the United States as a bizarre gesture of undermining an ally in order to curry favor with an adversary. I don't see it that way. I see this as potentially a positive diffusing of tension between the United States and North Korea, and hopefully improving the relationship with China. But that's not the way it's being played by mainstream media in the United States right now.
So, Professor Keechang Kim, some say the conflict involving Iran has altered the broader geopolitical environment, and Washington now has a strong incentive to avoid another major crisis in the Korean Peninsula through diplomacy. Do you agree? Why or why not?
I suppose President Trump himself is trying to link Iran war with a Korean Peninsula's situation. In his Truth Social posting, he said he decided to scale down the joint military drill with South Korea because South Korea was not helpful in Trump's effort in Iran war. But that is very unfortunate, and that is very unfortunate kind of attempt to link, because about the Iran war, South Korea really has no reason whatsoever to get involved, you know. I mean, first of all, the Strait of Hormuz was open and tankers were freely passing by before Donald Trump started this inexplicable war. Now, nobody knows whether Strait of Hormuz is open or closed, and it's flipping, flopping every other day. And why should South Korea get involved in that? But scaling down joint military drill with US and South Korea, that, however, is a completely different matter. And I don't know whether Trump understands that under the current presidency of South Korea, scaling down is actually a good news. It's not really kind of, telling off South Korea. For South Korean current administration, President Lee is actually announced on 15th of August, just a few days ago. South Korea now wants to talk about peace treaty between North Korea and South Korea. The two countries were technically in a state of war ever since 1950 Korean War. That war situation is still continuing, and President Lee of South Korea recently announced that now we no longer want war. That is, I think, a welcome gesture, and many people, not everybody in South Korea welcome it though. The extreme right-wing segment of South Korea is really hating this sort of development because they are really pro-war or whatever. But the current administration of South Korea is trying to make peace, and scaling back joint military drill is certainly a good direction. And I think for US, denuclearization of North Korea is no longer a viable goal. Under the previous administrations, what they called CVID, whatever, denuclearization, that has been a mantra that has been treated as the unshakable policy goal of the United States in Korean Peninsula. Now, I don't think that is viable. Nobody can dream of denuclearizing North Korea. North Korea is a nuclear capable country. Now, the only available option for the US is to turn a hostile nuclear capable North Korea into a friendly nuclear capable country. That somersault is the only available option for the United States. Whether Trump can achieve that, we will have to wait and see.
So, will North Korea buy President Donald Trump's goodwill gesture? I mean, since the Iran war began, Pyongyang has consistently portrayed Washington as an unworthy actor and a disturber of the international order. Is North Korea ready to re-engage with the United States?
I think so. North Korea really wants peace, in my view. They don't want sanction. They have kind of overcome a long period of US imposed sanction, and then during the recent Ukraine war provided even better opportunity for North Korea to cope with the sanction regime. And I think North Korea really wants to make peace with the United States and remove sanction. And if US recognizes and accepts that North Korea is nuclear capable, friendly nation in this area, then it would be a win-win for all parties concerned. North Korea, South Korea, if they make peace, and then US can become friendly ally, then all three countries can coexist with peace. Whether China would welcome that development is another question. But with South Korea being pretty, close friends with China. This kind of, if the tripart, North Korea, South Korea, U.S. relationship, if that becomes friendly, I don't think that will pose more threat to China compared to the current situation where U.S. South Korea are allied against China. The current situation is, in my view, worse than hopefully a new regime where U.S. and two Koreas become friendly and peaceful countries.
Yeah. Judging from the official statement from China's foreign ministry, I guess China is always welcoming any move towards peace on the Korean Peninsula. I think that's for sure. Now, Professor Chen Yun, I guess this is a point that both Professor Kuznick and Professor Kim indicated earlier. Reducing tensions with North Korea and creating space for dialogue are central to South Korean President Lee Jae-myung's agenda. So would you agree with this idea or analysis that President Donald Trump's decision to scale back military drills is actually doing President Lee Jae-myung a favor by helping create an atmosphere for dialogue with North Korea? Would you agree?
I think this view seems to align with the ideological goals of the progressive faction, the left wing in South Korea. But I do not agree that President Trump's sudden reduction of military exercise is helping President Lee Jae-myung. In fact, Trump's unilateral business-style diplomacy has undermined President Lee Jae-myung's diplomatic strategy. So by reducing U.S. Security commitment to something that can be discounted at any time due to political show, Trump not only undermined President Lee Jae-myung's position, weakened South Korea's overall defense posture, but also gave Kim Jong Un a huge geopolitical victory for free. President Lee Jae-myung and his ruling Democratic Party did advocate easing tensions through dialogues. However, Lee Jae-myung's diplomatic approach relied on a method of advancing with chances and a structure. Using the deterrence of the South Korea-US alliance as the stable foundation and advancing the Peninsula peace negotiation. So now Trump suddenly cut the military exercise without any consultations with Seoul. It was equivalent to giving away a crucial negotiation chance that the island force held. This did not create the so-called favorable atmosphere. Instead, it deprived President Lee Jae-myung of his leadership role as the direct party involved in the Peninsula issue, leaving the South Korea government with no leverage to negotiate. And domestically, it also undermined the ruling credibility of Lee Jae-myung because the political issue, domestic political issue, is quite divided in South Korea. Now, the South Korea conservatives are ambitiously capitalizing on this, describing Trump's actions as absolute proof that Lee Jae-myung's progressive policies for alienation in Washington and destroying the broad alliance between South Korea and the United States. So it left South Korea defenseless in the face of the alliance between North Korea and Russia.
Okay, let's take a very short break here, and coming back, our discussion will continue. Stay tuned. You are back with World Today. I'm Ding Heng in Beijing. Today we are exploring how the Trump administration's approach is raising questions about the sustainability of the U.S.-South Korea alliance. Joining our discussion, Peter Kuznick, professor of history with American University, Keechang Kim, professor of law with Korea University, and Professor Chen Yun from Fudan University, who is also a visiting professor with the Graduate School of International Studies, Seoul National University. Professor Keechang Kim, going back to you, one observation is that the key issue is increasingly not U.S. intent, but U.S. capacity to sustain a high level of military presence in the Asia-Pacific region at a time when it is fighting a war in the Middle East. What is your take?
Yes, this also links back with what Professor Chen very helpfully remarked during your earlier questioning. Professor Chen's account is that Donald Trump's decision to scale back joint military exercise is dealing a heavy blow to President Lee of South Korea, and his President Lee's support rating is falling, and right-wing segment, which is in the opposition, right-wing segment attacking Professor Lee because of Donald Trump's decision to scale back the joint military drill. But I have slightly different view. First of all, you need to understand that President Lee has long been portrayed and known as pro-China presidential candidate. President Lee has persistently been attacked as too leaning towards China. The right-wing segment in Korea has been attacking President Lee for this. Another important point you need to understand is that President Lee, he has been elected in spite of this attack. So those who voted for President Lee actually want to continue friendly relationship with China. And under this presidency, President Lee basically launched two important initiatives. One is he tries to negotiate to recover the operational control of South Korean military. To some listeners, it would be shocking that South Korea, being a country which is pretty, well known, does not have operational control of its own military. Who has operational control of South Korean military? United States. Now that situation has been going on for 70 years, and President Lee is now openly pledging that he will take it back from the United States during his presidency. So that's a very, very major step President Lee is taking. And second one is, I already told that President Lee wants to start conversation in order to achieve peace treaty between South Korea and North Korea. So considering that these two are President Lee's main goal, policy goal, scaling back joint military exercise can only contribute to his policy compared to the situation where U.S. and South Korea heavily allied and trying to launch military drill against North Korea and potentially China. That will certainly not contribute to the peace initiative President Lee is pursuing. Now, the answer to your question can be very simply put. For a long time, South Koreans did believe that the United States is protecting South Korea. Against what? Against North Korea and against China. So South Koreans have long believed that we need U.S. protection. Now, I must say that things have changed. Decreasing number of South Koreans feel that we need U.S. protection. Actually, increasing number of South Koreans feel that South Korea is contributing to United States foreign policy towards China in this region. U.S. military is using facilities in South Korea. Why? Not to protect South Korea, but because U.S. has its own agenda against China, and South Korea is merely providing assistance to US. It's not that US is protecting South Korea. It's the opposite. South Korea is offering assistance to US foreign policy or military policy towards China. Now, I think US has lost capability of having a disastrous war in Iran and launching another catastrophic war in Korean Peninsula. That I hope should never happen. If it ever happens, US will permanently be enemies of Korean people. And I don't think US can launch a war in Korean Peninsula simply because North Korea does not want war and South Koreans do not want war.
So since you talk about China, Professor Kim, we know China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi has just paid a visit to South Korea. So is President Trump's, let's say, transactional approach to Washington's alliance with Seoul creating a even stronger incentive for South Korea to develop positive relationship with China?
Sure. I think the way forward is for South Koreans to obtain more independence from US policy. You know, just entrusting a military operational control of South Korean military to United States and just follow to US commands, that is certainly not good for South Korea. South Korea has become a big boy now. It's no longer a poor, helpless, and powerless country who needs protection of the grandiose United States. No, now, South Korea and North Korea, if these two countries become friendly, the regional security, in my view, will most satisfactorily be achieved. If two Koreas become friendly, no more threat of war in this area. If two Koreas are friendly, why would China be hostile to any of the two Koreas? So I think the step and the move forward is for South Korea to try to achieve more independence from US. Now, the current Trump administration's unprincipled approach to diplomacy is, in my view, helping. It's not a disastrous for South Koreans. I think it's good for South Koreans. While Trump has his own reasons to try to make some deal out of his attempt to engage with Kim Jong Un and North Korea, that's fine. That's actually very good for Koreans. And we will wait and see whatever Trump's reasons might be.
So, Professor Kuznick, turning to you, in your observation, why is South Korea, as a traditional ally of the United States, reluctant to cooperate with the United States in the Iran conflict, which is a major complaint driving President Donald Trump's order to scale back this annual military exercise?
The South Koreans see that the U.S. war with Iran, U.S.-Israeli war with Iran, is a disaster from day one. However, the Israelis want this to continue, but the war is so unpopular. Maybe 20% of Americans support this war right now. Well, why would anybody want to support the United States? Before this war started, the Strait of Hormuz was open. The oil and the gas were flowing. This is a nightmare that Trump created, but it's potentially even more dangerous. A desperate Trump and his close associates and advisors are discussing the possible use of nuclear weapons against Iran. That would be the ultimate disaster. But there's also Elbridge Colby, who is the policy chief for the Pentagon. Elbridge Colby has advocated using tactical nuclear weapons if any fighting breaks out in the Pacific also, which gets back to your other question, that the United States capabilities have been greatly diminished. The Patriot and THAAD interceptors have been largely eliminated or dramatically cut, and there's demand for them in Ukraine, in Taiwan, everywhere, but it's going to take the U.S. military-industrial complex 3 years to replenish the supply. What we've seen going on in Southwest Asia is the Iranians are shooting $25,000, $30,000 drones, and they're being taken out with $1 million to $4 million interceptors. It doesn't make any sense. And so the U.S. capabilities, if something breaks out in the Pacific, the U.S. plan is the air-sea battle plan. What that calls for, according to Admiral Davidson, when he was in charge there, he said it would take U.S. troops, U.S. Navy, 3 weeks to get to the Taiwan Strait. So the U.S. strategy was to have the South Korean and the Japanese militaries go in there first. When Professor Kim correctly talks about South Korea wanting to get operational control of its military back from the United States, it's because the United States not only has 28,500 troops in South Korea, but the U.S. in wartime would have complete control over the South Korean military and would deploy them immediately to the Taiwan Strait. For obvious reasons, President Lee wants to have control over that military, not have the U.S. have control over that military. But U.S. capabilities are greatly diminished in the region. And what we've seen now is that the United States has even moved the last aircraft carrier that is in the Indo-Pacific region toward the Southwest Asia to relieve the USS Abraham Lincoln, which has been deployed there for almost 9 months without any break. So we've got a very untenable situation going on right now, and that it would greatly be in South Korea's interest to improve relations, and would ultimately be in North Korea's interest as well to improve relations. I think China would be happy to see peaceful relations on the Korean Peninsula. So I think this would be a win-win. But part of the issue is the crazy way that Trump goes around doing this, not informing his cabinet, not informing South Korea, this kind of personal transactional diplomacy that undermines alliances, creates havoc and chaos.
Professor Kuznick, I think you must be aware of this development. The Iran war has turned South Korea into a major defense supplier to some Gulf countries like Saudi Arabia and the UAE. They are nowadays purchasing a mid-range air defense system from South Korea rather than depending exclusively on U.S. military hardware. So what does such a scenario mean to the alliance between South Korea and the United States, in your opinion?
I think the United States, while the military sector in the United States might not want to see those sales going to South Korea, the U.S. politically should be happy that South Korea is doing that, because the U.S. is not able to supply, especially the interceptors, to shoot down the drones and especially the ballistic missiles that are getting through. The United States covered up for a long time how much damage Iran was able to do to U.S. military assets in the region. But Saudi Arabia and the UAE, as well as Qatar and Bahrain and the others, certainly are very much aware of that. When Trump makes threats to take out the Iranian infrastructure, Iran responds that they're going to take out the infrastructure throughout the Gulf. If they hit the desalination plants, then it becomes almost impossible to continue to live there. So the South Korean interceptors that are being sent there and missiles cost, to replace the U.S. ones that sometimes cost $4 million, some of the South Korean ones are much more affordable, more in the $1 million range. That's still a lot of money to take out a $35,000 drone or a relatively inexpensive missile, but it's more affordable than what the U.S. was providing. So South Korea has been providing that, but they don't want to get dragged in more deeply into this war, even though they very much need the oil and gas that comes through the Strait of Hormuz.
So, Professor Chen Yun, last year the Trump administration threatened a 25% tariff on South Korea before agreeing to a 15% tariff rate in return for South Korean investment in the U.S. But since then, progress seems to be quite slow in terms of South Korea's move to invest in the United States. So, do you think economic issues could also be a factor in Donald Trump's decision to cut short this annual military exercise?
I think that's correct. The White House staff and Commerce Department officials in private conference directly touted South Korea officials as the slowest negotiators ever. In contrast, Japan, which has also committed 550 billion US dollars to invest in the United States, has now recently completed the signing of 6 super projects. As for South Korea, not only is this 200 billion still in the discussion stage, but at the beginning of this year, due to a delay in approval of the trade agreement by the South Korea parliament, Trump angrily threatened to immediately restore the tariffs to 25% in January. I think in Trump's business diplomacy philosophy, tariffs, military exercise, and troop deployment costs has never been isolated. They are all interchangeable commodities. And under the political pressure of the upcoming midterm election in the autumn, Trump desperately needed South Korea to convert those $200 billion into specific American semiconductor factories, battery factories, or some large-scale energy purchase order as a political achievement to win over domestic blue-collar voters. So shortening the military exercise was, I think, assent to the Lee Jae-myung government of South Korea. If you do not accelerate the implementation of large-scale investment, the next target to be sacrificed will not only be the military exercise, but also the revival of the 25% punitive tariffs, possibly even the withdrawal of the U.S. troops stationed in South Korea.
Okay. If we take a look at some of the traditional U.S. allies elsewhere across the world, Denmark recently chose a French-Italian air defense network over the U.S. Patriot system. Canada is re-evaluating its commitment to the F-35 program, and recently there was also this remarkable signing of the Mecca Joint Defense Agreement between Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Pakistan. So, Professor Kim, we can argue that South Korea's trend to seek independence, strategic autonomy, is by no means an isolated case. It's part of a global trend. So, in the case of South Korea, how can Seoul replace reliance on the U.S. with independent strategic insurance policies if Seoul wants to do so?
That is a somewhat complicated issue, obviously. South Korea is a democratic country, and people have different views. So depending on which person gets elected president, South Koreans' policy and long-term goal might undergo significant change. Fortunately, in my view, I'm sure there are many South Koreans who disagree with me, but for me, the current president is aiming for peace. So while that is happening, peace has some chance. But I think in the United States, it's the same thing. people, U.S. citizens, they have different views. Some have hawkish views. Some have the view that peace would be a better option. But ultimately, there are two things we need to take into account. These two are change of perceptions or change of long-held convictions, which are no longer valid. One is that denuclearization myth. It has long been U.S. foreign policy that, countries who are not recognized nuclear powers should not be allowed to develop nuclear weapons. That's what happened in Iraq, that's what happened in Libya. But North Korea has seen all these, and I don't think North Korea will ever voluntarily agree to give up nuclear weapons. So, as far as Korean situation is concerned, denuclearization is no longer feasible. Now the US citizens must accept that. They have to be ready to ditch the idea of denuclearization and draw foreign policy from a different starting point. That is one thing. Another point is, or something I already mentioned, US must realize that they are not the one who is offering protection to South Korea. South Korea no longer needs protection. Thank you very much. US has provided South Korea for many decades. We thank them. But if US foreign policymakers continue in this mode of thought, they would annoy quite a lot of South Koreans, I'm afraid. So they must realize that this is no longer a situation US protecting South Korea, but South Korea obtaining independent stance and independent priorities and independent foreign policy decisions, and work in harmony and in friendship with United States and with China and with North Korea. That, in my view, would be the way forward.
So, Professor Peter Kuznick, specifically regarding the issue of the nuclear deterrence, public support for an independent deterrent among South Koreans has hovered around 70% in recent surveys. So, do you think President Donald Trump's decision to cut short the military drills will push that support even higher? And is it realistic for South Korea to pursue independent nuclear deterrence?
It's realistic, but I think it would be disastrous. The more countries that have nuclear weapons, the greater the chance that they will be used. Right now, there are 9 nuclear powers in the world, and they are all modernizing their arsenals, making them more lethal. So to have South Korea join that nuclear club would be the worst thing that could happen, in my opinion. The pressure is global right now. It's not just South Korea. The Takaichi in Japan has discussed getting rid of the 3 non-nuclear principles there. The defense minister, Koizumi, has said Japan needs a debate about having its own nuclear weapons. And Japan has a massive stockpile of plutonium and certainly the technological know-how to develop them very, very quickly. You've got Naraki, the president of Poland, saying Poland needs its own nuclear weapons. You've got Zelensky in Ukraine saying either let us join NATO or give us nuclear weapons. You've got the Saudis talking about it, the Emiratis, Egypt, Turkey. We are on the verge of nuclear anarchy globally, which would be terrifying. What we need is nuclear abolition, not more countries developing nuclear weapons. I can understand why some South Koreans would feel the pressure and the lessening of defense ties with the United States might put more pressure on South Korea to go that direction. I know President Lee doesn't want to do that. That's why I think it's incumbent upon Kim Jong Un to respond positively. If Kim responds positively to this potential opening now, that would alleviate the concern on the part of many South Koreans that they're isolated and defenseless against nuclear North Korea. So Trump, for some reason, is in love with Kim Jong Un, he says, and Kim Jong Un loves him. Well, let's take advantage of that wacky, bizarre relationship and move toward diffusing tensions on the peninsula and developing the kind of friendly relations that would remove the need for on the part of many South Koreans to have their own nuclear weapons. That's what I'm hoping for.
Professor Chen Yun, the final question goes to you. Some Asian allies of the United States, in particular the Philippines, are nowadays deeply involved in a U.S. geopolitical game against China. So, as Manila watches the way in which the Trump administration approaches Washington's alliance with Seoul, do you think Manila should wonder whether its relationship, its alliance with the United States is as unstable as the Koreans? Should Manila reconsider what exactly is the best way to deal with China?
I think this is a crucial strategic issue that the Moscow government in Manila must confront. For the Philippine government, witnessing Donald Trump cut the U.S. South Korea military exercise because Seoul refused to join the Iran war or failed to promptly fulfill the 350 billion investment commitment and secretly withdrew the Patriot missile unit stationed in South Korea is undoubtedly a wake-up call. This conveys a signal to Manila. If the United States is willing to modify and discount the 70-year blood alliance with South Korea, which is a global economic giant and the core of technologies, then once the political winds in the United States change, Trump will not hesitate to treat this alliance with the Philippines as a disposable chip that can be discussed at any time. The Philippines should not wait until Donald Trump suddenly posts something on social media to realize that its safety umbrella has failed. So the most effective way for the Philippines to safeguard its sovereignty is to stop acting as the frontline agent for an exhausted military empire and instead engage in practical diplomacy with its neighboring countries in the Asia-Pacific region, develop economic and trade relations, and manage maritime disputes.
Well, a big thank you to our panelists, Professor Peter Kuznick from American University, Professor Keechang Kim from Korea University, and Professor Chen Yun from Fudan University. That's all the time for this edition of World Today. I'm Ding Heng in Beijing. Thank you so much for listening. Bye for now.